The shoulder is an elegant piece of machinery. It has the greatest range of motion of any joint in the body. However, this large range of motion can also lead to shoulder joint problems. Understanding the different parts of the shoulder can help you understand how the shoulder works, how it can be injured, and how challenging recovery can be when the shoulder is injured. The important structures of the shoulder can be divided into several categories. These include bones, joints, ligaments, tendons, muscles, nerves, blood vessels, and bursa. The bones of the shoulder are the humerus, or the upper arm bone, the scapula, or the shoulder blade, and the clavicle, or the collarbone. The roof of the shoulder is formed by a part of the scapula called the acromion. There are actually 4 joints that make up the shoulder. The main shoulder joint, called the glenohumeral joint, is formed where the ball of the humerus fits into a shallow socket on the scapula. This shallow socket is called the glenoid. The acromioclavicular, or AC joint, is where the clavicle meets the acromion. The sternoclavicular, or SC joint, supports the connection of the arms and shoulders to the main skeleton on the front of the chest. A false joint is formed where the shoulder blade glides against the rib cage. This joint, called the scapulothoracic joint, is important because it requires that the muscles surrounding the shoulder blade work together to keep the socket properly aligned during shoulder movement. Articular cartilage is the material that covers the ends of the bones of any synovial joint. Articular cartilage is about 1/4 of an inch thick in most large weight-bearing joints. It is a bit thinner in joints such as the shoulder, which don't normally support weight. Articular cartilage has a rubbery consistency. It is very slippery, which allows the joint surfaces to slide against one another with very little friction. Articular cartilage functions to absorb shock and provide an extremely smooth surface to make motion easier. There are several important ligaments in the shoulder. Ligaments are soft tissue structures that connect bones to bones. The joint capsule is a watertight sac that surrounds a joint. In the shoulder, the joint capsule is formed by a group of ligaments that connect the humerus to the glenoid. These ligaments are the main source of stability for the shoulder. They help hold the shoulder in place and keep it from dislocating. Ligaments attach the clavicle to the acromion in the AC joint. 2 ligaments connect the clavicle to the scapula by attaching to the coracoid process, a bony knob that sticks out of the scapula in the front of the shoulder. A special type of ligament forms a unique structure inside the shoulder called the labrum. The labrum is attached almost completely around the edge of the glenoid. When viewed in cross-section, the labrum is wedge-shaped. The wedge shape and the way the labrum is attached create an elevated rim around the glenoid socket. This is important because the glenoid socket is so flat and shallow that the ball of the humerus does not fit tightly. The labrum creates a deeper cup for the ball of the humerus to fit into. The labrum is also where the biceps tendon attaches to the glenoid. Tendons are much like ligaments, except that tendons attach muscles to bones. Muscles move the bones by pulling on the tendons. The biceps tendon runs from the biceps muscle across the front of the shoulder to the glenoid. At the very top of the glenoid, the biceps tendon attaches to the bone and actually becomes part of the labrum. This connection can be a source of problems when the biceps tendon is damaged and pulls away from its attachment to the glenoid. 4 tendons connect the deepest layer of muscles, the rotator cuff muscles, to the humerus. Just before these muscles attach to the upper end of the humerus, they join together to form a single tendon called the rotator cuff. The rotator cuff muscles lie just outside the shoulder joint. These muscles help raise the arm from the side and rotate the shoulder in many directions. The rotator cuff muscles and tendons also help keep the shoulder joint stable by contracting and holding the humeral head tightly in the glenoid socket as the humerus moves. The large deltoid muscle forms the outer layer of shoulder muscle. The deltoid is the largest, strongest muscle of the shoulder. The deltoid muscle provides the power to lift the arm once the arm is away from the side. The main nerves that travel into the arm run through the axilla under the shoulder. 3 main nerves begin together at the shoulder: the radial nerve, the ulnar nerve, and the median nerve. These nerves carry the signals from the brain to the muscles that move the arm. The nerves also carry signals back to the brain about sensations such as touch, pain, and temperature. There is also an important nerve that travels around the back of the shoulder joint to supply sensation to a small area of skin on the outside of the shoulder and motor signals to the deltoid muscle. This nerve is called the axillary nerve. Traveling along with the nerves are the large vessels that supply the arm with blood. The large axillary artery travels through the axilla. If you place your hand in your armpit, you may be able to feel the pulsing of this large artery that supply blood to different parts of the shoulder. The shoulder has a very rich blood supply. Sandwiched between the rotator cuff tendons and the deltoid muscle are structures known as bursa. Bursa are everywhere in the body. They are found wherever two body parts move against one another and there is no joint to reduce the friction. A bursa is simply a watertight sac between two moving surfaces that contains a small amount of lubricating fluid. As you can see, the shoulder is extremely complex with a design that provides maximum mobility and range of motion. Besides big lifting jobs, the shoulder joint is also responsible for getting the hand in the right position for any function. When you realize all the different ways and positions we use our hands every day, it is easy to understand how hard daily life can be when the shoulder isn't working well.
Well, that's practice making me itch.
shoulder. So he's laying down on his right side. What I want to do is lock out that joint so I have only motion right here at the glenohumeral joint. First step for the Spencer technique is extension of the shoulder with flexion of the elbow. Now right here, I'll just get into the treatment aspect that you can do on any step. So right here, if I find a restricted barrier, what I want to do is add either an articulatory, where I just try to work through it, or I can add a muscle energy. So there'll be an isometric contraction, so go ahead and push towards my hand, and relax, and then I'll engage that next barrier. So that's the first step. Next step, we have flexion at that joint with extension of the elbow. The steps after that, there are two steps that involve circumduction. So that's just working through the intra-articular area. First step, I'm pushing down. So just working through that joint. If I find any restrictions, I can kind of work through that. After that, I'm going to go into traction with circumduction. I like to hold right here in case there's any elbow pathologies, but you can also hold up here at the wrist if you find that easier. And again, traction and circumduction. The steps following that, keep your hand right here and then put the patient's hand just proximal to your elbow. First step now is going to be abduction and internal rotation, again looking for any restrictions, a deduction and external rotation, followed by a deduction and internal rotation. A little pearl here is that as you're looking for any restrictions in this joint, you don't want to apply too much force because that can hurt the shoulder. So what I do, my rule of thumb is just 2 fingers, and that amount of force is about as much as you need. And then if there's any restriction, just go ahead and push against me and relax, and I can move it to that next barrier. After that, I'm bringing the arm up into abduction and extension and putting his hand on my shoulder. Now the steps for all of the Spencer technique don't necessarily matter what order you do it in. If you just want to focus on one type of motion, you can do that. But whenever you're finishing up the Spencer, this should be the last step, because what you're able to do here is mobilize any of the fluid that you may have released and really make sure you milk out that joint and make sure that you have some good fluid motion. So what you want to do here is just kind of work through that joint, make sure you're mobilizing any intra-articular fluid. And what I like to do is just walk up and down. So I'm varying the degrees of abduction in that glenohumeral joint.